there's a lot of opportunity for growth here, for sure. And I'm just starting by being curious about my response to things that maybe I'm realizing are scary for me.
The banyan tree is a tree unlike others, a representation of resilience and strength through its ability to overcome the status quo and fulfill its purpose.
It knew that it was meant for something bigger and didn't allow the limits of other trees to confine its growth.
And our story looks similar. I'm Leslie.
And I'm Mindy, and our hope is that every one of our listeners learns to take up all the space they were created to, just like the banyan tree. Welcome back to the Banyan Effect podcast. I'm your co-host, Mindy, and today we're super excited to continue the conversation about our most favorite current read, Worthy by Jamie Kern Lima. So we started down this path of exploring this book because we went to this live conference and we thought, we should do an episode on what we learned through this one-day conference. And then when we started diving into this book, we really realized that it needed to be an extended conversation. And so we're going chapter by chapter through this book and adding in our experiences and how we can relate to this concept, this really important concept of feeling worthy just because you were born, not because you've accomplished anything. And so last week we talked a little bit about redefining self-confidence and self-worth which is something I think a lot of us can relate to because it's easy to have self-confidence or build up your self-confidence and then realize that maybe you're still lacking in that self-worth area. So today we want to start the conversation off with a question from the book, and that is, what would you do in your life if you had absolutely zero fear of rejection? And this is going to be something that we both are going to be authentically talking about because we were both a little bit stunted by that question.
Yeah, stunted is definitely the right word. It's a really hard question to answer, and I feel like there's a lot of different pieces of it. But one of the things that stood out to me right away was that I haven't experienced a lot of rejection in my life. That's where my first sort of thought went when I really listened to that question and I didn't know how to answer it. When I really think about like, what would I do if I didn't fear rejection? And then my mind went to, well, I've gotten all these things and I have success and I haven't had a lot of rejection. I feel like what that's telling me is I'm actually not taking enough risks and I have this like actually a deep-seated fear in rejection and I'm not pushing myself hard enough and going outside of my own comfort zone and finding challenges and seeking them out to get the rejection to allow me to grow. That's not a good thing. I need to be a little bit more bold and experience more rejection to help me grow even more.
Yeah, and I think that's like the definition of staying in your comfort zone. And I think sometimes like somebody like you who has accomplished a lot, you have seen a fair amount of success in your career life. And so it's easy to think that you've faced that, but that's exactly true. Like people like I think you and I who are kind of like that type A personality, perfectionist type, like we're not going to go after something unless we're really confident that we're going to be able to accomplish it or we're going to be able to get the promotion or whatever it may be. And so I think that it can be a sign that we're staying comfortable and we're actually not taking enough risk. And what would happen if you actually what would it look like if you did do that? That's the question, right? Like, is there anything you can think of that you would actually do differently now that you're aware? Because I think the first, we're going to get into the 4 R's that the book talks about. First one is reveal. So like now that you've revealed that maybe you aren't being as brave as maybe you thought that you were, how would your life look different if you actually stepped out onto a limb that was really scary?
The thing that kept me from maybe being more bold before was just like, is that fear of rejection or fear of being ostracized from a group or fear of not being able to move up at work. There was all of these fears. And so just like how we talked about in last week's episode, it was easy to become this chameleon and just sort of fit in. But I think the more that we are leaning into like my authentic self, we did start the business and I did change the jobs and I am showing up more as myself. And so I think, what would I do if I wasn't afraid of fear of rejection? I would do exactly what I'm doing right now, where I'm just leaning into all of these new experiences and things that feel right, and starting the business without the end plan in mind. That wouldn't have been something that I would have done. My perfectionism would have blocked me from doing that. I would at work, I'm showing up as myself, I think for the first time ever in my career, and it's freeing. So without fear of rejection, I think I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and leaning into who I am as a person and seeing where it takes me. What about you, Mindy?
I love that. I love that. Well, I have actually a really good example, and it took me a while to think about it because my job's a little bit different. I mean, to some degree, am taking a risk every single day I wake up because I'm self-employed, right? So I don't have a stable income. I don't have somebody paying me money to do what I wake up to do every day. So I was kind of like, well, I'm already living that. But then I started thinking a little bit about it, and one of the things that my current brokerage offers is different streams of income. And one of those different streams of income is bringing other agents in. And that is an area that I know I have limited myself out of fear of opinion. I don't know if rejection specifically plays into that, but I know for sure I'm afraid to call an agent and be like, "Hey, I really love working with you. I love what I see from you. Would you ever consider joining me at my brokerage?" I don't do that because I am afraid that there is a little bit of a stigma that's been formed around these types of conversations and these types of brokerages, and it's really important to me to quote unquote prove that I'm not that type of agent. Like I'm not that agent that's doing that. And it's ultimately going to affect my family and my passive income down the road because I'm doing this. And I don't have the answer. I mean, I think that I've revealed it, which is the first R, so we're on a good start, but I don't know what I'm going to do about that information right now because there's still a part of me that's really kind of scared to step out on that limb and just I don't know why. It's something that I've struggled with for years, but I think, just acknowledgement is the first step. And that's where I'm at, is I'm realizing I'm paying attention, staying curious. We love that slogan. I'm staying curious about responses that I'm having, about different suggestions that people have. Like maybe it's around my YouTube channel for real estate, and all of a sudden somebody has a suggestion and it's like a hard no, an immediate fast no. I'm trying to get more curious about that. Like, why was that such a quick no? Like, is there some sort of fear of rejection around me saying yes to that suggestion from like my coach or something like that? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for growth here, for sure. And I'm just starting by being curious about my response to things that maybe I'm realizing are scary for me.
Yeah. I mean, I go back to just even starting this podcast. I was so scared that people were going to reject me for the story that I was going to share here, because my past is not in the perfect path. I would have wished that it would have been a lot different, and it's messy. And so I think sharing and talking about sharing my actual experience of the last 20 years of my life was really scary. And I thought that sharing that was going to cause the rejection from all of the people around me. So the realization that that's what was keeping me from pursuing these dreams of starting my own business and being an entrepreneur and stepping outside of my career path too. I was terrified to pivot away from marketing, which is what any sort of education or training, or that's my background. So that rejection of people are going to reject my story was definitely what was keeping me from doing it.
We can say honestly and wholeheartedly that as of right now, just because we said yes doesn't mean it's easy and successful. I mean, we're struggling to get the word out and to grow. We have to keep showing up, but it's hard when you don't get the response that you want and you hope for and that you believe that you should have for saying yes. Like we're doing the brave thing. There's still fear of rejection, even though we're doing it. And I also think that that's the beautiful part, because if it were easy, everybody would do the thing. And maybe it's not podcasting for you, but whatever the thing is for you, if it were really easy and it was for everyone, it wouldn't be worth it, right? So let's transition into these 4 R's. And we already kind of talked about the first one, which is reveal. Identify your current default definitions you give to rejection and failure when it happens, or the one that you use to talk yourself out of even trying, which is huge. These are often disempowering and happen automatically without intention. And I think when I was talking about those automatic no's, I think that's a really good example of, maybe a friend says to you like, hey, you're really incredible at painting. Well, you should consider selling your artwork. And it's like this immediate, like, no, like I would never, fill in the blank, whatever it is. I think a good way to reveal these things is just to stay curious and to be really aware of your response to things like that feel really scary. Like for me, I'm picking through those and I'm paying attention and staying curious. And I can identify a few where I'm like, I wonder if there's something there, because my immediate response is like, nope. And just like asking that immediate question too, I realized like, oh, the reason I'm not reaching out to other agents or inviting other agents to join my organization, there's clearly something there, because I started asking that question and I didn't realize that. I think before I had a lot of pride in it and was just like, oh yeah, I'm just attracting agents to come to my organization. And really that was a cop out. That was like, no, you're afraid of opinions.
Yeah. She asked the question in this chapter. She said, "What's the first thing you think of when you experience rejection?" We all have these feelings of like, I'm not smart enough. I'm not liked enough. I don't deserve that. And so that is, to me, feels like that first step of like, when you do get that rejection, what's the immediate thing that goes through your head? Like, I'm not smart enough. I didn't get the job. I'm not smart enough. And then you need to move into, all right, let's reframe. Let's reframe what that rejection is actually meaning.
So the second R that they talk about in the book is redefine, which is create new, empowering definitions that you're going to assign to rejection and failure when they happen, or when you're tempted to not try out of fear of them happening. So this is huge. And this is like when you recognize that automatic response that maybe you're questioning. And I know for me, this is a perfect example. I made up this movie in my head. And it was that, what if my team thinks that I'm not as committed to them now because I have this podcast? Or what if they think that I'm working on the podcast and that I'm not going to be doing real estate? And so what I did, because I wanted to believe a different narrative, as I should, because I was assuming the worst. I was assuming that they would think the worst instead of the best, right? So I put in my calendar, it sits right now, every single day, 7 days a week, there is a reminder in my calendar, and it says, what if I become the best damn leader they have ever had? And I have that task in my calendar, and it pops up every single day because it reminds me that I can't continue to be the best leader that I can be if I am not doing the personal growth. And what this podcast does for me is it forces me to read these chapters and reflect. And, even when I maybe don't feel like any more personal freaking growth, I committed, I signed up, I'm here. And so I have to, because I've made this promise to you, Leslie, and our audience. And so now I've reframed that, and I have no more fear about my team questioning whether or not I am still going to be the very best leader, because I now, honest to God, believe that this podcast is actually going to make me the best leader that I can possibly be. So I think that's just a perfect example of how to redefine those fears.
Yeah, I love that. For anybody that known me for a while knows that I've talked about going out on my own for a really long time. In fact, I remember the first marketing job that I left to go, I got a promotion into another company. The very first person that found out that I was leaving said, "Wow, I thought you were going to go out on your own." And that has stuck with me forever because I know that it has always been this like deep seated desire inside of me. And so this voice has never gone away of like, you're meant for something more, you're meant for something more. But I never could quite identify what that thing was. And the more that my story has unfolded, the more that I know that it was something like this podcast. But again, that like deep seated fear of rejection of people are going to reject me. I'm not going to be good at this. I don't know what I'm doing. But the more that we get into it, the more that that little voice is starting to go away because I think that I'm getting closer to who I am meant to be as a person. And that fear of rejection is also going away because the more that we lean into this failure, we could launch an episode and it doesn't get as many views, or we put out an Instagram social reel and nobody likes it. But the more that we do that, the more that we're learning. And then we're slowly starting to get this feedback that we're helping other people. So that story that I was so afraid to share and was so afraid that I was going to get rejected for, the more that that story is out there, the more that I realize that my purpose is what I was scared of rejection, but the rejection that I was scared of is actually my purpose in my life. And so I've realized that my story and my voice are now becoming my superpower and they're helping other people. I just have to keep sharing. Was like such a pivotal moment in my life. Like it was this huge sense of freedom.
Well, and that's the thing. If it's something that's scary, chances are that's the direction you're supposed to go because it's not, our purpose, like what we're put on this planet to do is it is going to be scary. And the next chapter of this book, we haven't gotten into it yet, but I think it's called like you're not crazy, you're just first. And I have a feeling we're going to learn a lot more about why it's so scary to think about like, well, if I'm meant to do this, why is it so scary? It's because you're probably the first person. And not that you and I are the first person to put out a podcast, obviously. But I mean, we're the first person doing it the way that we're doing it. It is scary and it feels really lonely because we're doing it. We're first. And so if you're feeling that way, like that's a good thing. That is probably a sign that you're in the right direction.
Yeah. There's a perfect example this weekend, Mindy. Obviously, our daughters had a cheer competition and they did not get first place and had some really unfortunate falls. So you could say that they failed this weekend in a sense. They felt like they failed at least. And so the whole way home from this cheer competition last night, the girls were checked out. They had their AirPods in. They just needed a break. But I was thinking in my head the whole time, I'm like, I want to figure out, I have to figure out the best way to talk to them about this, what they see as failure in their minds. I don't want to approach it of a like, you're going to get it next time. And don't worry, the judges shouldn't have graded you here. I didn't want to feed into that. I wanted to really use what I've learned from this chapter and be a better parent as a result of it. And so the conversation then this morning on our way to school was, how cool is it that you are failing in your routine in all of these different areas right now? Like every single time that a stunt falls or the timing is off or someone didn't point their toes, you're learning all of these different failures and you're growing from each one of those failures. And every single time you become a little bit stronger team. And it was such a different way of thinking and reframing those failures in their mind. And I could see them relaxing as we were having the conversation, and not just relaxing, but also getting excited about the failures that they had out in their performance, because they realized, yeah, that was a different failure than we had last time. And now we've learned 2 different things. And maybe another time we're going to have a different failure. And now we've learned 3 different things. And people who don't fail are not the ones growing, or the people that don't get rejected are not the ones that are growing.
I think it's also a choice. If you do exactly what you did with the girls, which is to choose to redefine it, which is actually the next R, which is perfect transition. But if you choose to reframe it, that's what will happen. You will learn from your mistakes. So the third R says revisit and reframe rejections of the past. Assign new meanings to these past rejections and failures that still feel significant in your life. And I think the cheer competition is a really great example, but we need to do this with like the big bad things in our lives that have happened a long time ago, because when you don't deal with like the grief of a death or a loss or the failure of a promotion, whatever it may be, if you didn't do the work then, it's not too late. And I will also say, like, from my personal experience over the last year or so, that if you don't go back and reframe those, and this is the amazing thing about the brain, is we have neuroplasticity where we can rewire things, your growth will be stunted. I also feel like that, like those, if you don't deal with these things in your past, that they can also become your ceiling, because they are tied into your worth. And that's been a really amazing thing that I have done with some of the different therapists that I've worked with, is I've gone back in time and reframed and readjusted and literally rewired the memories. Have I talked about how my grandma now does karate in my belly? Have we talked about that? I don't know. Okay, well, real quickly, I went back with a hypnotherapist and talked about the death of my grandma, and we figured out why it was so difficult for me. And, that's a whole nother episode. But the end result was that she, like, basically in my brain, she put my grandma like back inside of me. And from a therapy standpoint, like, I guess putting those memories and stuff, they live like in your belly. If you like, if you ever think about a feeling or a feeling of someone you've lost or whatever, like you can kind of feel it in your belly. Anyways, so we put my grandma back in my belly, and she was like, the point of this whole exercise was that she was going to keep fighting for me, right? And so all of a sudden, I started getting these visuals of my grandma doing karate in my belly. Sounds so bizarre, but it reframed, it worked. It like rewired my memory and my thought process of my grandma. And now it's like the whole purpose was like, she's still fighting for me. She's still on my side. And she's like doing karate moves, which is also like some really great comedic relief at any given moment of time. But that's like the power of going back. I mean, my grandma passed away when I was 13 years old. I mean, this was decades and decades ago. And in just one short session, we were able to reframe that or rewire that memory. I mean, that's a really powerful exercise. And this is what we need to be doing. And this is what this chapter is talking about.
Yeah, I just love that story. I've heard it so many times, and every time it makes me so happy you are still feeling these feelings around it and needed to reframe them. So I think it is the perfect example of what that means. One of the things that has really helped me and is these experiences happen for us, not to us. I don't I have heard that phrase forever, but only recently did I really allow myself to believe it and force myself to believe it. And it made me go back to all of these really traumatic experiences that have happened in my life. And as I get closer to finding myself and starting this podcast and leaning in and sharing these stories, it's like I really do feel that now, that all of these experiences happened for me, because now here I am able to share this story and impact and help others, hopefully around the world. And so now I can say those experiences, I'm not the victim in those experiences. Those experiences empowered me to share this story and build this podcast and keep growing.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into the fourth R, which is revel, which I love that one, because it's not like a task, right? It's like it's such a mindset shift. The fourth R says, revel in rejections ahead. They no longer phase you, which I don't know. I think the bigger in life we go for, they may still phase us, but I like where she's going with that.
Mhm.
Think, dear rejection, you might be big, but my resiliency is bigger. And this one is really, easy to redefine. You just have to change your mindset around rejection. The example
Mhm.
I gave earlier, if I call an agent, I'm like, hey, I loved working with you. I'd love it if you would join my organization. Are you at all interested? And they said, no, I hate you. Like that would be the worst case scenario, right? I would be like, okay, that's all right. It's not a good fit. That doesn't mean
Mhm.
that the next person isn't going to really appreciate that invitation and take it, right? But we have to change that mindset that we have around it.
Yeah, I think you develop such a sense of freedom and courage when you start to do that. The more that I shared my story, the more that I realized I was finding myself. I didn't get ostracized from the group. In fact, the exact opposite happened.
The book says research shows that when people reflect on difficult, painful experiences with the goal of finding meaning or something positive that's come from it, they're happier, make better decisions, give better advice, and solve problems more effectively. Our motto is don't waste the struggle. And that's exactly what it is. Like we talked about on the last episode, that we don't know. Like you and I, we both want to know what next year is going to look like, but we can't because we have no idea how much growth is going to come from today through the end of the year. Look at how much change and growth that you and I have seen in the last 4 or 5 months. I just want to share another quick story about something that she talks about in the book. So the author, Jamie Kern Lima, was adopted by her mom and dad. She talks about how her biological mother and father were together exactly one time and she was created. And I could relate to that because that's how I was procreated. My biological father gave up rights from not day one, but it's a long story. He ended up giving up rights when my mom was going to get remarried and my stepdad wanted to adopt me. And so I knew my whole life that I was given up for adoption by my biological father. And then I never ever felt actually chosen by my stepdad who adopted me. I love him very, very much. And I know that he loves me too, but I was not chosen like my brother and sister were. My mom and stepdad had 2 kids together and they were treated very differently than I was my whole entire life. And so the type of abandonment that you live with when you have that kind of situation, I think can be one of those ceilings. It can be one of those really hard things to get over. And so when she talks about this, that she decided to reframe that, like I was given up for adoption and I was not chosen, she chose to reframe it to I was chosen by my adopted family. I struggled with that. It hurt my heart because I was like, I wasn't chosen by either. And then I continued reading where she talks about how she was chosen by God. And I do believe with my whole heart that I was chosen by God to be here. And so that's the truth that I choose to believe. But those types of abandonment issues or whatever, maybe that's not your issue, but there's something there that can cause you to feel rejection from like your core. Like I was rejected at birth is how I the thought patterns that I had to a degree, until I decided, again, it's all about your decisions and your choice. And I decided to reframe it and say, I was chosen by God. Like the chances of me being created in that moment, right, were pretty slim to none. But here I am, right? And so I was clearly chosen by God. And thankfully, my mom, she was very, very young. She was 20 years old and she chose me, obviously. So, but again, it was just one of those things that really important, life altering situation that I had to choose to redo, reframe.
Yeah, I love that you've been able to take what is a negative experience and you use it as your power now, which is exactly what that reframe is meant for. There's another part of this chapter that says it's not about denying things that have happened in the past, but rather about assigning a meaning to them that transforms them into peace and empowerment. And I think that's exactly what you've done with the reframe of your story of adoption and not being chosen, is now it's turned into your superpower. And I think the same thing about when I said earlier on this podcast that my voice has turned into my superpower. And my voice has turned into my superpower because I have been able to take those experiences and traumas in my past and reframe them. And the things that I learned from the attempted suicide of a loved one is more than I have learned in my entire life combined. So the things that I have taken from that, the ability to connect with people and give grace and see the connectedness of human beings, that is something that I never would have gotten or received as a gift had I not gone through an experience like that. In that moment, it felt like my world crumbled to the ground. But now looking back on it, I'm so grateful for that experience because I definitely wouldn't be the type of leader that I am. I definitely wouldn't be the type of friend that I am. And I wouldn't have found my purpose in what we're doing right here without those experiences. So I love being able to, how she talks in her book of like revisit those experiences. Don't try to bury them in your past, but instead dig them up and bring them forward and reframe them and allow it to become your fuel or your superpower.
Yeah. And I also believe that we can't provide, like, you wouldn't have the grace that you have for other people if you wouldn't have been so close to a situation like that. And so these other things that we go through as well give us so much perspective and grace for each other. And I think once you can find grace for yourself and you can find grace for everybody else, relationships become a lot easier and a lot more fulfilling.
As we wrap up today, we do want you to think about this conversation and what experiences do you have in your past that you have the opportunity right now to go revisit and reframe? And can you take that reframe and use them and create a superpower within yourself to help you grow as a person? You come back next week. We are going to dive into chapter 3 of Jamie's book, Worthy, and we can't wait to see you back here.
We hope you have enjoyed today's episode and found some valuable insights. If you liked what you heard, we'd love it if you would hit the subscribe button.
We love hearing from our listeners, so drop us a comment, share your thoughts on social, or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback keeps us going and helps us bring you the content you want to hear.
As always, we appreciate your time and company. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep listening to the Banyan Effect podcast.